Today, our verse is Luke chapter 24, verse 35. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. When Jesus joined the two disciples on the way to Emmaus, they did not recognize him until Jesus sat with them at the table to eat. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him. In our verse today, these two disciples tell the apostles and the other disciples how they recognized Jesus at the breaking of the bread. One characteristic element in the resurrection appearances of Jesus is eating with the disciples. Jesus wanted to demonstrate to them that he was not a ghost, because ghosts have no physical body and cannot eat. But more than just showing them that he was not a ghost, the disciples came to understand something more fundamental about Jesus' eating with them. They call it the breaking of the bread. This became the way the early church referred to the celebration of the Eucharist, the continuation of the Last Supper, which Jesus instituted and handed over to them to do in memory of him. What I like to focus on in this verse is the breaking of the bread, which seems to be the accepted way the early church referred to the Eucharist. In Acts chapter 2, verse 42, we read that the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and the breaking of bread. Acts chapter 20, verse 7 suggests that the celebration of the Eucharist was an important part of the believers' gathering. We read, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. So the breaking of bread referred to the continuation of the celebration of the Last Supper, the Eucharist, which Jesus instructed the disciples to do in memory of him. During the resurrection appearances, Jesus had to teach them how important the breaking of bread should be among them, as it brings down his real presence. The early Christians recognized and felt the presence of Jesus at the Eucharistic celebration, which they called the breaking of bread. So what is essential in our verse is that they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. All along the way, these two disciples on the way to Emmaus did not recognize Jesus until Jesus revealed his identity to them in the meal that they shared. Therefore, the breaking of bread became a sign of Jesus' presence among the disciples. Jesus reveals himself to us, even today, in the celebration of the Eucharist. But we can see him truly present only with the eyes of faith. But to see Jesus, we need the same experience as these disciples. First, Jesus took them through the scriptures to prepare their hearts for him. It was only after that they recognized him. At the celebration of the Mass, we begin with the readings from the Old Testament, followed by the New Testament epistles, and finally the Gospel. That was how Jesus taught these disciples, beginning with the Old Testament before introducing them to him as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies. In the Mass, the readings must lead and prepare our hearts to receive Jesus. Only then can we truly recognize him and value who he is. Many people doubt Jesus' presence in the Eucharist, just as these disciples doubted his resurrection until they recognized him at the breaking of bread. As you partake of the Eucharist, do you see Jesus in that piece of bread and in the chalice? Lord, open our eyes to recognize you at the breaking of bread whenever we celebrate the Eucharist. Amen. God bless you, and I wish you a splendid day.